What if the most dangerous weapon in the ancient world was not a sword, but a book? Imagine spending your entire life copying a single manuscript by hand, knowing that one mistake could erase years of work. Now imagine that someone in power decides those words should never be read again. The pages are collected, the shelves are emptied, the scrolls disappear, and within a single generation, knowledge that had survived for centuries is almost forgotten forever. History remembers great battles, powerful kings, and mighty empires. But behind those stories is another battle, one that was fought without armies. It was a struggle over ideas. Across the ancient world, rulers understood something that remains true today. Knowledge is power. The people who control knowledge often shape the future. This is the story of the books that almost vanished, the libraries that refused to be forgotten, and the remarkable discoveries that brought lost voices back into history. Long before printing presses, every book was made by hand. There were no factories producing thousands of copies. There were no digital files stored safely on computers. If a book existed, it usually existed in only a handful of copies. Some were unique. If a single scroll was destroyed, its contents could disappear forever. Creating one manuscript demanded incredible patience. Sheets of papyrus, parchment, or vellum had to be carefully prepared. Skilled scribes copied every word by hand, sometimes working for months or even years on a single volume. A small mistake meant starting over or making careful corrections. Books were expensive. Rare books were priceless. Because of this, libraries became some of the most valuable places in the ancient world. They were not simply buildings filled with books. They were vaults of human memory. Inside them were histories, poems, religious writings, scientific observations, medical treatments, maps, legal records, and philosophical ideas collected over hundreds of years. Every shelf represented generations of human experience, but knowledge has always been fragile. Fire could destroy an entire collection overnight. Floods ruined delicate scrolls. Insects damaged fragile pages. Wars scattered libraries across continents. And sometimes political or religious leaders decided that certain writings were dangerous enough to remove from circulation. Not every disappearance was the result of censorship. Many books were simply lost through time. Others survived only because someone quietly copied them before the originals disappeared. Understanding the difference between deliberate suppression and accidental loss is one of history's greatest challenges. That is why historians depend on evidence rather than rumours. One of history's greatest centres of learning was the famous Library of Alexandria, although many details about its destruction remain debated. Historians agree that it represented one of the largest collections of knowledge in the ancient world. Scholars travelled from distant lands to study mathematics, astronomy, geography, medicine, literature, and philosophy. Imagine walking through endless shelves filled with handwritten scrolls from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and beyond. Each scroll carried ideas that had crossed deserts, mountains, and seas. Many existed nowhere else on Earth. The loss of even a small part of that collection reminds us how easily knowledge can disappear. Yet Alexandria was only one chapter in a much larger story. Across the ancient world, monasteries, temples, royal courts, and private scholars all maintained collections of valuable writings. Some libraries flourished for centuries, others vanished without leaving a trace. Sometimes only a single surviving copy preserved an entire work. Without that one manuscript, historians today would know nothing about it. This is why every surviving ancient text matters. It represents far more than ink on paper. It represents survival. As powerful empires expanded, they often collected knowledge from conquered lands. Great rulers valued books because they contained practical information about agriculture, engineering, medicine, astronomy, navigation, taxation, and law. Knowledge helped governments function. But knowledge could also challenge authority. New religious beliefs could question established traditions. Philosophical ideas could encourage independent thinking. Political writings could inspire resistance. For that reason, some rulers attempted to regulate which books could be copied, preserved, or publicly shared. This did not happen everywhere, nor did every empire follow the same approach. History is much more complex than a simple story of good and evil. Some empires built remarkable libraries. Others unintentionally caused collections to disappear through war and neglect. A few rulers deliberately restricted certain writings. Each case must be understood within its own historical context. That is exactly what we will do throughout this investigation. Instead of repeating legends, we will follow the evidence. One of the greatest challenges historians face is separating stories that grew over centuries from facts supported by surviving documents. Sometimes the evidence is clear, sometimes it is incomplete. And sometimes the greatest mystery is not what was destroyed, but what somehow survived. Modern archaeology has transformed our understanding of ancient libraries. Buried ruins have revealed forgotten archives. Dry caves have preserved fragile scrolls for nearly 2,000 years. Ancient jars, sealed and hidden from the outside world, have protected writings that scholars once believed were lost forever. Each discovery reminds us that history is still being uncovered. Some of the world's most important ancient texts were not found inside famous museums. They were discovered by accident. A shepherd searching for a missing animal, workers digging foundations, farmers clearing fields. Ordinary people have occasionally stumbled upon extraordinary pieces of history. Those discoveries changed what we know about the ancient world. But they also raised difficult questions. Why were these texts hidden? Who placed them there? Were they being protected from war, from time, or from people who wanted them destroyed? The answers are not always simple. In many cases, historians can only reconstruct the past by comparing archaeological evidence, ancient writings, and careful scientific analysis. Yet one discovery stands above almost all the others. A collection of forgotten scrolls, hidden for nearly 2,000 years, survived one of history's most turbulent periods. When they were finally uncovered in the 20th century, they transformed the study of ancient religion, language, and history. Their discovery would become one of archaeology's greatest moments. And it all began inside a lonely cave overlooking one of the driest landscapes on Earth. The story of forbidden knowledge did not begin in a palace. It did not begin inside a great library. And it certainly did not begin with an emperor. Instead, it began in a lonely desert where almost nothing seemed capable of surviving. For centuries, the rocky cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea appeared lifeless. The landscape was harsh, rain was rare, summer temperatures climbed to extreme levels, and the dry air made survival difficult for both people and plants. Few imagined that this unforgiving place would one day reveal one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd was searching for one of his missing goats among the cliffs near the ancient settlement of Qumran. As he climbed across the rocky hillside, he noticed a small opening in the cliff. Hoping his animal might be hiding inside, he threw a stone into the cave. Instead of hearing the sound of the rock striking the ground, he heard something unexpected. The sharp sound of breaking pottery. Curious, he climbed inside. Waiting in the darkness were several tall clay jars that had remained sealed for nearly 2,000 years. Inside those jars were ancient scrolls. The shepherd had unknowingly discovered what the world now knows as the Dead Sea Scrolls. At first, no one fully understood their importance. The old leather scrolls looked fragile and worn. Some were damaged. Others had survived surprisingly well because the caves remained cool and incredibly dry throughout the centuries. Local dealers purchased some of the scrolls before scholars realized what had been found. Soon, archaeologists, historians, and language experts from around the world arrived to investigate. What they uncovered changed biblical studies, archaeology, and ancient history forever. The collection contained hundreds of manuscripts and thousands of fragments. Some were copies of books from the Hebrew Bible. Others included religious writings, community rules, hymns, prayers, calendars, and commentaries that had never been seen before in modern times. Many of these texts were more than 1,000 years older than the oldest known biblical manuscripts available to scholars at that time. That discovery alone was extraordinary. For the first time, researchers could compare ancient copies with later versions and study how these texts had been preserved across centuries. But another question quickly emerged. Why were these scrolls hidden inside caves? Historians believe the most likely answer is connected to war. Around the 1st century AD, Roman forces were advancing through the region during the First Jewish-Roman War. Many scholars think members of a nearby Jewish community hid their treasured manuscripts inside the caves to protect them from destruction. If that explanation is correct, these scrolls were not hidden to keep knowledge away from future generations. They were hidden to save that knowledge from being lost forever. It is an important distinction. Throughout history, people have often hidden books not because they feared knowledge itself, but because they feared what war, invasion, or political violence might do to it. Sometimes the safest library was one no one could find. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls also reminded historians that history is rarely complete. For centuries, these manuscripts had remained completely unknown to the modern world. Entire generations of scholars had studied ancient history without realizing these writings still existed. Then, almost by accident, everything changed. Archaeologists soon began exploring nearby caves. Over the following years, they discovered additional scrolls and thousands of small fragments scattered across multiple locations. Each fragment became another piece of an enormous historical puzzle. Experts spent decades carefully matching tiny pieces together like an ancient jigsaw puzzle. Some fragments were no larger than a postage stamp. Others contained only a few letters, yet even the smallest piece helped scholars better understand the ancient world. The work required incredible patience. Specialists used photography, language analysis, and modern imaging technology to read faded writing that was almost invisible to the human eye. Every recovered word expanded humanity's understanding of the past. The discovery also challenged a common misunderstanding. Many people assumed ancient books disappeared only because rulers ordered them destroyed. The evidence told a much more complicated story. Some texts survived because ordinary people risked everything to protect them. Anonymous scribes copied manuscripts by hand. Families carried books during times of war. Religious communities hid their collections before enemy armies arrived. Without those unknown caretakers, countless ancient writings would have vanished forever. Yet not every ancient text was so fortunate. Across history, many collections truly were lost. Some disappeared in accidental fires, others were destroyed during invasions. A few were deliberately burned because political or religious leaders believed certain ideas threatened their authority. Each case has its own history. Each deserves to be studied carefully rather than grouped into a single explanation. That careful approach separates history from legend. As historians continued examining the Dead Sea Scrolls, they realized something remarkable. These manuscripts did not reveal secret magical powers. They did not rewrite all of human history. Instead, they provided something much more valuable. They offered an authentic window into the beliefs, language, and daily lives of people who lived more than 2,000 years ago. Sometimes the greatest discoveries are not dramatic because they prove wild theories. They are important because they replace speculation with evidence. And that is exactly what archaeology is meant to do. Still, the Dead Sea Scrolls were only one example. Elsewhere in the ancient world, another forgotten collection waited in silence for more than 16 centuries. Unlike the scrolls hidden in desert caves, these writings were buried inside sealed jars near the Nile River. Their discovery would reveal early Christian texts that many people had never even heard of. Some had disappeared from history for over 1,500 years. Others preserved ideas that powerful religious leaders later rejected as official beliefs. Together, they would raise one of history's most fascinating questions. What happens when different versions of the same faith compete to shape the future? That question leads us to another extraordinary discovery, one that historians still study today. The discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls proved one important truth. Not every ancient text disappeared because someone wanted it destroyed. Many were hidden to protect them. But history also records another reality. There were times when powerful rulers believed that certain books, ideas, and teachings threatened their authority. In those moments, words became dangerous, not because they could fight battles, but because they could change the way people thought. Throughout history, governments have often understood a simple fact. A person with a weapon can challenge an army. A person with an idea can change an empire. One of the earliest documented examples comes from ancient China. In 221 BC, the ruler who became the first emperor of China united several competing kingdoms into a single empire. Known today as Qin Shi Huang, he transformed the country in remarkable ways. He standardized weights and measures. He introduced a common writing system. He expanded roads and major construction projects. These achievements helped unite a vast empire. But the emperor also wanted something else. He wanted control over ideas. According to ancient historical records, many philosophical writings that criticized the new government or praised earlier rulers were ordered destroyed during what later became known as the burning of books and burying of scholars. Modern historians continue debating the exact scale of these events. Some believe later writers may have exaggerated parts of the story. Others believe the destruction was real, but more limited than traditional accounts suggest. What most historians agree upon is that the Qing government attempted to control which ideas could circulate throughout the empire. It was not simply about books, it was about authority. If everyone read different philosophies about government, law, and leadership, maintaining a newly unified empire became much more difficult. Books became political. Ideas became powerful. Yet history has an interesting habit. Even when rulers destroy books, they rarely destroy every copy. Some writings survived because families hid them. Others survived because scholars memorized entire passages. Still, others were rewritten years later from memory or preserved in distant regions beyond government control. Knowledge often proves more resilient than those who try to erase it. Centuries later, another extraordinary example unfolded on the other side of the world. In 1945, near the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi, local farmers made an accidental discovery while digging near the base of a rocky cliff. Inside a large sealed clay jar were 13 ancient leather-bound books. Together, they became known as the Nag Hammadi Library. The books contained more than 50 ancient writings. Many belonged to groups of early Christians whose beliefs differed from what later became accepted as Orthodox Christianity. Some texts had disappeared for nearly 1,600 years. Before their discovery, historians knew these writings only because other ancient authors had criticized or quoted small portions of them. Now, for the first time in centuries, scholars could read the original texts themselves. The discovery transformed the study of early Christianity. It revealed that the first centuries of the Christian faith contained far greater diversity than many people had realized. Different communities interpreted teachings in different ways. Some emphasized spiritual knowledge, others focused on tradition. Some accepted writings that others rejected. Eventually, church leaders recognized certain books as authoritative while excluding others from the biblical canon. That process shaped the religious history of millions of people. It is important to understand what historians actually mean when they describe these texts as suppressed. The evidence does not suggest that every copy was hunted down across the ancient world. Instead, many writings gradually disappeared because they were no longer copied, studied, or preserved by the largest religious communities. In the ancient world, survival depended on copying. Books did not last forever. Papyrus decayed, ink faded, leather cracked. If a manuscript was not copied again and again, it eventually vanished. Sometimes disappearance happened through deliberate rejection. Other times it happened simply because attention shifted elsewhere. That difference matters. History is often more complex than a simple story of censorship, yet there are also documented moments when conquerors intentionally destroyed written knowledge. One of the most tragic examples occurred after the arrival of the Spanish in Central America during the 16th century. The Maya civilization possessed folded bark paper books known as codices. These manuscripts recorded astronomy, mathematics, history, religious ceremonies, calendars, and generations of accumulated knowledge. When Spanish missionaries encountered many of these writings, they believed they promoted beliefs incompatible with Christianity. As a result, numerous Maya codices were deliberately burned. Today, historians believe thousands may have been lost. Only 4 authenticated Maya codices are generally accepted to have survived into the modern era. Imagine losing an entire library of scientific observations collected across centuries. Imagine never knowing what discoveries disappeared forever. That is exactly why archaeologists treasure every surviving manuscript. Each preserved page may represent countless others that no longer exist. Looking across these different civilizations, a remarkable pattern begins to appear. Ancient Egypt, China, the Middle East, Mesoamerica, different cultures, different languages, different religions, yet all understood one universal truth. Knowledge possesses power. Sometimes that power strengthened governments, sometimes it challenged them, sometimes it inspired faith, sometimes it encouraged questions, and questions have always made powerful people uncomfortable. But perhaps the greatest lesson from these stories is not that books were burned, it is that books survived. Despite wars, despite censorship, despite neglect, despite time itself. Human beings continued copying manuscripts, they continued hiding libraries, they continued preserving ideas for generations they would never meet. Without those unknown scribes, monks, scholars, and ordinary caretakers, much of ancient history would have disappeared forever. Their quiet determination became one of humanity's greatest achievements. Yet one final question still remains. Today, with satellites, artificial intelligence, advanced archaeology, and digital preservation, are there still forgotten texts waiting to be discovered? Or have we already found the last great hidden library? The answer may surprise you. Because some of history's greatest discoveries have happened only within the last 100 years, and archaeologists believe the next extraordinary discovery could still be waiting beneath our feet. After thousands of years, countless wars, collapsing empires, and the passing of entire civilizations, one remarkable truth still remains. Ideas are incredibly difficult to destroy. Books can burn, libraries can collapse, empires can disappear, but knowledge has an extraordinary way of surviving. Sometimes it survives because someone copies a manuscript by hand. Sometimes because a family hides a scroll inside a cave. Sometimes because an ancient library is buried beneath layers of earth and forgotten by history. And sometimes it survives simply because one person believed the future deserved to know the truth. Today, archaeologists continue searching for those forgotten voices. Although many people imagine archaeology as digging for gold or discovering lost cities, much of its greatest work happens quietly. Researchers carefully brush away layers of soil. They examine broken pottery. They study faded ink under powerful microscopes. They use satellites to identify buried buildings. They scan ancient manuscripts using technology that can reveal writing invisible to the human eye. Every new discovery helps answer questions that historians have asked for generations. But every answer also creates new mysteries. One remarkable example comes from a place that was buried by one of history's greatest natural disasters. In AD 79, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius destroyed the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Buildings disappeared beneath volcanic ash. Homes were frozen in time. For centuries. Everything remained buried beneath hardened layers of volcanic material. When archaeologists eventually uncovered the ancient city of Herculaneum, they made an astonishing discovery. Inside an elegant Roman villa, later named the Villa of the Papyri, they found hundreds of ancient scrolls. At first, the scrolls appeared completely destroyed. The intense heat from the volcanic eruption had turned them into black, fragile cylinders that looked like pieces of burned wood. Many early explorers believed they were beyond saving. Some even broke apart while people attempted to open them. For years, historians feared their contents had been lost forever. Then modern technology changed everything. Instead of physically unrolling the scrolls, scientists developed advanced scanning methods that could look inside them without causing damage. Using powerful imaging systems and computer analysis, researchers slowly began reading words that had remained hidden for nearly 2,000 years. It was one of the most exciting moments in modern archaeology, not because treasure had been discovered, but because forgotten voices could finally speak again. The Villa of the Papyri reminded the world that ancient knowledge still waits patiently beneath the ground. Sometimes history is not gone, it is simply waiting for the right technology. The same story continues across many parts of the world. In Egypt, archaeologists continue uncovering sealed tombs and forgotten temples. In Iraq, researchers work to preserve clay tablets written in cuneiform thousands of years ago. Across Europe, medieval monasteries continue revealing forgotten manuscripts hidden inside their archives. Even today, museum collections contain thousands of documents that have never been fully translated or carefully studied. The work is far from finished. Every generation inherits another piece of the puzzle. One of the greatest changes in recent decades has been the digitization of ancient manuscripts. Libraries across the world are carefully photographing rare books, page by page. High-resolution images allow researchers from different countries to examine the same manuscript without risking damage to the original. Artificial intelligence is also becoming an important tool. Computers can now help identify faded handwriting, reconstruct missing letters, and compare thousands of ancient texts in ways that would have taken human scholars many lifetimes. Technology is not replacing historians. It is giving them new ways to ask old questions. And those questions remain as fascinating as ever. Who wrote these books? Who copied them? Who protected them? Who tried to destroy them? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what have we still not found? Experts believe countless ancient texts disappeared forever. Papyrus naturally decays in wet climates. Wooden libraries burn. Wars scatter priceless collections across continents. Entire languages vanish when no one remains to read them. For every manuscript that survives, many others have almost certainly been lost. That realization is both heartbreaking and inspiring. Heartbreaking because we know that some voices have been silenced forever. Inspiring because every surviving manuscript becomes even more precious. Every page represents a victory over time. Looking back across our journey, we can now answer the question that opened this documentary. Were ancient texts really suppressed by empires? The evidence tells us that the answer is complicated. Some rulers did attempt to control ideas. Some governments restricted books. Some religious authorities rejected certain writings. Some conquerors destroyed libraries during war. Those events are documented by history, but they are only part of the story. Many texts disappeared through accidents, natural disasters, changing languages, neglect, and the simple passage of time. Others survived because ordinary people risked everything to preserve them. History is rarely black and white. It is a tapestry woven from thousands of individual choices. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden inside every ancient manuscript. Knowledge does not belong to one empire. It does not belong to one religion. It does not belong to one generation. It belongs to humanity. Every civilization has added something to the story. Egypt gave us remarkable records written on papyrus. Mesopotamia preserved laws and literature on clay tablets. Greek philosophers explored reason and science. Roman scholars copied and preserved earlier works. Jewish scribes protected sacred writings with extraordinary care. Medieval monks spent lifetimes copying books by candlelight. Without each of these people, our understanding of history would be far smaller. The true heroes of this story were not emperors. They were the anonymous scribes, the librarians, the monks, the archivists, the scholars, and the ordinary individuals who believed that preserving knowledge mattered more than receiving recognition. Because of them, voices from 2,000 years ago can still be heard today. As archaeologists continue exploring forgotten caves, buried cities, abandoned monasteries, and ancient libraries, there is every reason to believe more discoveries still lie ahead. Perhaps another sealed jar waits beneath the desert sands. Perhaps another forgotten library rests beneath an ancient ruin. Or perhaps the next great discovery is already sitting inside a museum archive, waiting for someone to recognize its importance. History has surprised us before. It will almost certainly surprise us again. And maybe that is why these ancient texts continue to fascinate us. Not because they contain forbidden magic or impossible secrets, but because they remind us that knowledge is one of humanity's greatest treasures. It can be hidden. It can be forgotten. It can be challenged. But as long as someone is willing to preserve it, it can never truly disappear. Thank you for joining us on the Vertical Archive. If you enjoy authentic documentaries about forgotten history, ancient libraries, archaeology, lost civilizations, hidden archives, and the remarkable people who protected humanity's knowledge, be sure to subscribe. Because somewhere, beneath the dust of history, another forgotten story is still waiting to be read.